You hear that? You hear that? Yeah, baby. Finally got this thing running right. Woo! Okay, guys. So this is a Chinese 357 carb. All right. I didn't want to take the carb off of the saw. It's running good, and it'll sit there and hold an idle for indefinitely, you know. So let's talk about what the problem was and what I did to fix it. Again, if you see me fumble, I say again because I've done videos like this in the past. It's kind of difficult to record whenever you got a phone in between yourself and the object that you're fumbling around with. So, anyways. First, a quick explanation of how these carburetors work. A lot of people wrongfully consider this the fuel pump. It is not. The fuel pump is on this side. Let's take a quick look at it. This is your fuel pump right here. Literally this flap and this flap get moved back and forth by the impulse. The impulse line is right there. So as that piston moves up and down, it creates pressure drops. Like that, right? As that piston goes up and down, it is literally creating pressure drops back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Every time it does that, these two little flaps, let me get something better to point with. There we go. These two little flaps right here, this one gets blown up, this one gets sucked closed. Back and forth, back and forth. And that right there is your pumping action that draws fuel out of the fuel tank and into the carburetor, right? This side here, this is your float. Now, a conventional float will not work in a chainsaw because we turn that chainsaw upside down sometimes. Everything. We turn it on its side all the time. That happens all the time. But sometimes it'll get turned upside down. Excuse me. So, a conventional float that literally floats, and as the float goes up, it closes the needle valve. Whenever the fuel level drops, the float drops and it opens the needle valve. Well, that doesn't work for us. So what we have is we fill up this chamber, right? Whenever this chamber is full, this diaphragm gets pushed up. It's full, right? And whenever that diaphragm gets pushed up, it releases pressure on this right here. All right? It doesn't it doesn't hold pressure against that. All right? Now, by doing that, that needle right there, there's a needle. See how it goes up and down? See the little spring underneath there? There's a little spring under there. That spring is pushing up on this little lever, which is in turn pushing down on this needle valve, and that's what's sealing it up. Okay? So what I was experiencing is at full throttle, at higher RPM, you get more and stronger impulses, okay? So the more and stronger impulses was able to flow more pressure of fuel. The higher pressure of fuel was able to keep this open, right? Allowing this float chamber to stay full of fuel, right? However, at idle, it's producing less impulses, and I think they're also at less pressure, right? And therefore, the pressure of this spring was overcoming anything that this diaphragm right here could or was doing, which means it was no longer pumping fuel, right? Because it kept this closed. See, whenever you're pumping fuel, that needle seat right there is where the fuel comes from. This needle opens up and fuel gets pumped into this chamber, right? Whenever fuel gets pumped into this chamber to a point to where this right here raises up and no longer holds any kind of pressure on this, right? It closes off fuel flow. So at idle, we didn't have enough pressure to overcome any of this stuff, and your fuel flows into these holes. This one right here is your high side hole. That's your low side hole, right? There's also, looks like there's a hole right there in the jet. There's a hole here. They do various different things. But the point is at idle, it would slowly use up all of the fuel in this chamber, right? And it would just run out of fuel. And then you'd have to pull it and pull it again and pull it to get it to pump more fuel to fill this chamber back up. And it would run right. So at wide open throttle, we could pump enough fuel with enough pressure to fill up this chamber and keep it full. So that's why we weren't running out of gas at full throttle. But then at idle, we could not pump enough fuel and enough pressure to go against this needle seat. So now what was happening and how I fixed it? Well, it was twofold. Boop, boop, boop. Right? Number one, my lever here had too much throw. I want you to notice as I push this down how far I have to push it. See that? It's not moving the needle at all. Right? But you get to a certain point, it lifts it. Well, my lever, because I had, in setting it back and forth, I had somehow gotten it to where it had too much throw before it started to move the needle. Also, I had watched a video from Tree Monkey, and he was telling anybody that watched the video, that these HDA carbs needed to be able to hold 15 pounds of pressure. And well, in order to attain that, I took that spring and I stretched it out, gave it more pressure. And so that higher pressure on that lever, my fuel pump was not able to overcome it and allow fuel to flow in. All right. So what I did was, like I said, it was twofold. That lever was bent beyond reasonable fixing. Here it is. I couldn't ever get it quite right. So I scrounged around and I found another lever from a kit Pretty much any Walbro carb is going to have the same lever, you know. And so I just took that lever out and installed it. But before I did, I remembered that I had stretched out that spring. So what I did is I removed that spring and I clipped just a little bit off of it. Let me go ahead and show you the spring itself. This means I'll have to fiddle around and put this damn carb back together. There it is. So I had pulled it and stretched it out longer so that it would have more tension on it. And well, once you do that, you can't really get them to be shorter just by doing that, because they're springs, they just bounce right back. So all I did was I took a pair of scissors and I cut that whole top portion off. Where they're really close together, I just snip, cut it off. Put it all back together with a new lever that had the throw was correct, right? Like I said, I just for some reason couldn't get this thing bent the way that it needed to be. So I put a new lever in there. And I cut the spring so that it did not have as much tension, forcing that needle valve down. Because that spring was forcing that needle valve down, and it was your fuel pump could not overcome that at idle. Now with the choke on, it could overcome it, because the choke, you know, that is forcing your carburetor to pump more fuel and less air. And so it was able to overcome it with the choke on. But once that choke was off and it was still at idle, it would just hold pressure on that needle valve too hard, and your fuel pump couldn't overcome the pressure. All right, so there you have it. A different lever. And I snipped the large coil, you know, it's like 3 coils together. I snipped that off of there so that the spring was not holding as much pressure on the needle valve. And that's what fixed the carb. Now let's talk about something important. Here's what's important, all right? You guys give comments, and that's fantastic. I love it. Well, I got a lot of comments regularly throughout this whole saga of getting this damn 357 to run right, of buy a different carb, right? I got a lot of that. And, you know, a lot of times I would do that. I did that with the Steel MS 400, and it fixed it. Bada bing, bada boom. However, I want to learn more about carbs and carburetors. Because I need to know more about carburetors, because whenever you start running nitro, I'll really have to mess with these carburetors, and I want to really know the ins and outs of them. And I'm never going to learn the ins and outs of them if I just buy a new carb and throw it on there. Very few times are there that a carburetor can't be fixed. About the only time that it happens, just about the only time that it happens that you can't fix it, is whenever the aluminum body, in some way, shape, or form, is scored or demolished beyond reasonable repair. And so that usually happens whenever the throttle shaft holes get warbled out or something, and it's not making a good seal. There's also some little check valves inside the carburetor that will oftentimes cause a unreasonable repair, and you're not able to do it. So I really wanted to stick with the Walbro carb and see what it needed. And Well, I think that I've found out. So the saw seems to be running excellent. I can go back to it and restart it. Let's do it right now. Hold on. So this is the next day. I have not touched it. Let's just see if it'll do a one pull start just because. Nope. Let's pull the choke. I'll still need to do a bit of tuning on the carb. I haven't actually put it in the wood since I did that. But the problems that it was having before was all on idle. And so I think reasonably I can call it fixed. I will actually put it in the wood later today, but this video's already gotten too long. So, yeah, I wanted to learn how to work on the carburetors, not just replace them. Plus, you throw into that, I've got so much money wrapped up in that saw. I've got probably about $400 in it. And let me tell you, I bought it for $50. So, the cases, I needed to buy both case halves. And I didn't want to use 359 cases. You know, I didn't want to use 359 cases because I didn't want it to say 359. I wanted to say 357 XP. And what I found out was about the only place to get them was in UK, you know, in the United Kingdom. And so I would buy them and I would get them, and then there'd be little issues like the thread. Two of the threads for holding the case together would be stripped out. There'd be something broken off, and that, you know, I was getting them cheap enough, you know, probably $40 per case half. And, but, you know, I had to do it like 3 times before I got good case halves. And it was just over and over a total debacle. And so I will say this about the 359 and 357. They run really great. That thing is a great power to weight ratio now that I've got it all ported up and muffler modded. I mean, it runs really good. It really feels good to run it. However, their cases are fragile as little weak babies. You know, they bust ears off the case, bolts strip out and everything. I think that what caused that is Husqvarna was really concerned with the weight, because I believe they only weigh 12.1 pounds, and they were really concerned about the weight, and so they made the cases too thin, and they're just not tough. I mean, yeah, try and find them. You know, try and find 357 XP and or 359 cases. Now, you can find 359 cases pretty regularly, you know, but not like you can mostly anything else, really. And it's because they break. They break. So anyways, yeah, the chassis, while it feels good whenever you've got a good running one, and they last pretty well, seem to, and everything. But like if it's ever a situation where you have a limb drop on it, you know, a 266 might be like, oh yeah, no big deal. The 357, 359, oh, you just broke You just broke part of the crankcase, you know. It's been a pain in the ass. And so I didn't want to spend another $100 on a carburetor, you know, because then I got $500 in it plus the port job. And so to me, that is a $900 chainsaw that I'd be hard pressed to sell for $600. You know, and so it's been a total debacle. Totally. So I will say this and a little word of advice. If you're looking to get a 357 XP or a 359, make sure it's a good running condition before you get it. Or it was something simple, you know, like just an air leak or something. Don't get a basket case, because I've had to replace everything. Wasn't worth it. Not at all. Anyways, you guys take care, and I hope you learned something about carburetors in this video, and how they work, how they draw fuel, how they hold and store fuel, right? I know I learned a lot working on this damn thing, and so mission accomplished, I guess.